You are listening to the Information Security Innocent Podcast, episode 26, original release on September 24th, 2020. My name is Josh Amishav. This week we have James Kettle on the show. About once a year or so, James breaks the internet when he releases his latest bit of research. Last year, his research into HTTP desync attacks, which let attackers essentially play puppeteer with the web infrastructure of some of the largest internet providers, netted him over $70,000 in bug bounties. This year, James demonstrated some novel ways to poison some of the largest CDNs out there, like Akamai and Cloudflare. What really interests me, though, is his methodology to become such an epic researcher. My three main takeaways were: 1, what techniques he uses to decide what research topics are worth pursuing; 2, what behavior traits are needed to become a successful researcher; and 3, why the HTTP-only cookie flag is completely useless and a joke. You'll enjoy those two things, plus a bunch of other tips along the way. Direct support from this podcast comes from BreachSense, the data breach monitoring platform. I'm curious how many listeners to the show are confident that your personal credentials are not floating around the underground right now. More importantly, how many of you are confident that your employees, your customers, your spouses, or your children's credentials aren't floating around the underground either? At BreachSense, we use human intelligence to capture stolen credentials before they get leaked to public forums and pay sites. We then crack the hash passwords to give you visibility into whether or not the account needs to be updated or not. By integrating BreachSense's powerful yet easy-to-use API into your existing security solutions, you can prevent account takeover and stop online fraud. James Kettle, welcome to the show.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. So, on the off chance someone isn't familiar with you, who are you and what do you do?
Sure, I'm the Director of Research at Portswigger Web Security, the makers of Burp Suite, and my main job is to try and invent new ways of hacking websites and then talk about those at Black Hat USA, mostly.
Okay, and how did you get into InfoSec?
When I was at university, I had a lot of spare time, so much spare time, I got bored of playing Counter-Strike, and I was like, what else can I do? I know Google have just said that they'll pay anyone who can successfully hack them. So I started doing that, and after about maybe 50 hours, I found an XSS on YouTube, and everything went well from there.
Cool. So this past summer, you spoke at Black Hat USA on Webcash injection. How would you explain that technique to a 5-year-old?
I probably wouldn't try, to be honest. Basically, loads of websites use caching to make themselves faster, and sooner or later they say, well, we're getting all of this benefit from our caching, but how can we make it even better? How can we make it even faster? And how can we get more cache hits? And they do that by doing things like eliminating certain parameters from the cache key using regexes and such like. And as soon as you start doing anything like that, that can have massive security implications that are extremely subtle if you're not looking for them.
Okay, so let me see if I got this right. You're injecting a payload with parameters or headers that aren't used to create the cache key, which then gets stored in the cache and is served next time the resource is requested. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So the basic challenge with cache poisoning is you want to put your payload, your XS or such like, in a parameter somewhere, but you don't want the cache key to change. Because if your payload changes the cache key, then it won't get saved and served to other people. So the goal is to put your payload in the query string without the cache key changing, and you can take advantage of poorly written regexes and stuff such like to make that happen.
Okay, I want to zoom out and better understand how you come up with topics to research. You seem to look at topics that have been researched umpteen times before, yet you still manage to find new issues.
I think probably the main thing is that people don't really go hunting for these things because they have a lot of the topics that I've covered just like had a reputation for being really difficult. Like request smuggling last year is like that was publicly documented in 2004, and someone did a talk on it at DEF CON in 2016, and they gave a whole talk on it, but they basically said this technique is too dangerous to try on any live websites. So they only tried it on test systems, and thereby missed the fact that like Akamai, every website on Akamai was vulnerable, and that's a large proportion of the internet, right? And even watching that presentation back when it came out, I was like, that looks really difficult. I don't want to touch that. And I think everybody does that. They're like, oh, I'm probably going to put loads of time in and get nowhere. Whereas, so what I do is whenever I think that, I'm like, wait, no, this is my opportunity. I'm going to put loads of time in and it might work. And if it doesn't, well, too bad.
Okay, so on that topic, then, how do you know when to, like, how do you know you've done too deep and it's time to move on?
That's the real challenge. I try and I don't kind of dive in wildly. I'm like, what's the easiest, simplest thing I can do to find out whether this is a good idea, whether this is a worthwhile topic, or whether I'm wasting my time. So, for example, with the request smuggling research, I read the white paper and I only understood one of like the 5 techniques that they talked about. So I took that one technique and I wrote a really simple scan that would try that and in principle tell me whether that worked. And that took like 1 or 2 days. And I just ran that on a whole bunch of bug bounty sites. And it just flagged up like half of them as being vulnerable. And I was like, well, that's a good start. And that just tells me that's worth spending time on. Whereas I've had similar things that sounded really promising, and I try that, and it doesn't flag up a single one. Like, well, that's just a dead end, or I'm doing something wrong.
All right, and that kind of leads to the next question. I'm curious. So when you're doing something like that, are you using Burp? I don't know if that's the right tool. If you're going to do a mass scan, you can do something like zgrab or zmap, or like what do you do to do these massive scans to check to see if the research is worth digging into?
So I've got over the years, I've developed a pretty good setup with Burp that lets me do that quite effectively. So I've got a single Burp project file that has crawled every bug bounty site that I have access to. So it's about 40 gigabytes, but it still works very well. And I've got a kind of a Burp extension that is set up to let me easily run an individual hand-coded scan check on the whole lot. Like, it takes a few hours, but that's not that bad. Yeah, I do use zgrab sometimes. For example, some things like with internal cache poisoning, to have a decent chance of poisoning the internal cache, you need to send the request a lot of times. So when
can you explain that technique? Can you explain that? That was one of the things that I wanted to touch on. How does the internal cache poisoning work? It seemed like it was very difficult to know that you're actually testing for it, and you mentioned it's difficult to test it safely, but where do you even begin to get to access the internal cache for a backend system? It's
basically, well, so in general, most of the time when you can poison the internal cache, it's about two things. It's you just send poisoned host header, generally, maybe exported host, and then you get lucky. Because you can't use any cache buster, you have to time it perfectly. So it's generally not something that you do on purpose. It just happens by accident and then causes much stress, normally, because you can't undo it, and the cache generally just stays poisoned for several hours.
Okay, so there are tools that are in Burp now to automate this process. What percentage would you say Burp tools will do to give you full coverage? Meaning, when you run automated scans via Burp, can you be certain that if you don't receive a Webcash finding, does that mean it doesn't exist, or does that mean you've only covered, let's say, 40% of use cases, and now you need to do another 60% manual testing to see if you can bypass?
No, so with the scan checks, we would generally get like probably 90-95%, I would think. So with the scanner, you've always got the balance of, I want to send several hundred requests and have a scan that takes ages. It's like, is it worth sending this request if there's a 1 in 100,000 chance that it works on this particular target? So you have to draw the line somewhere, and the extensions that I release, because I'm doing research, tend to send tons and tons of requests. So you will find some things with those that you won't find with the core Burp scanner, but the core Burp scanner will get you the vast majority.
Cool. Okay. And topic of Burp, what are your favorite plugins that you like to use that you haven't written?
I mostly focus on ones I've written, to be honest. The other, I use Logger++ a lot, because you have to be able to see what's going on behind the scenes. It's really important. That's probably the main one.
What does that plugin do?
That just shows you, it's kind of like the Burp proxy view, but it shows you all the requests coming in and going out of Burp, including those being sent by the scanner. and by extensions.
Okay,
So
repeatability.
something like param miner, that's one of my extensions. If you just run it, it tells you if it finds something, but it doesn't tell you if it doesn't find something, and you don't know, well, what's happening behind the scenes, right? But if you use Logger++, you can see exactly how it's working.
Cool. Okay, what would you say is your superpower?
My superpower is spending a lot of time on things. There's no substitute for just being like, well, I'm going to spend 10 hours on this and it's probably going to go nowhere, but I'll do it anyway. That attitude is how you make real progress in research. As soon as you start saying, oh, this probably won't work, you're never going to find anything, because everything probably won't work.
Cool. Okay, now when you're doing research, where do you start from? Like, are you looking on Twitter for ideas, blog posts, or where do you get the inspiration to find something you want to dig deep into?
From a range of places. I try and keep up with techniques that other people are sharing on Twitter and such like, and I'm always asking the question, did they try every possible variation of this technique? Like, did they miss anything? Or maybe I could combine this technique that I read about with this other technique that I heard someone else mention 5 years ago, that kind of thing. And also just digging through old materials, because there's loads of really valuable stuff out there that came out 10 years ago and no one realized how significant that was at the time and such like. So that's like one source of ideas. I also just, a lot of ideas for just come into when I'm just trying to hack something and I just get stuck on something. Like, for example, as a pen tester, I used to continually run into that scenario that some of you probably run into yourself, where you've got XSS in a hidden input and you can't break out of the input, and you can't use on mouse over because the input's hidden, right? And if you're injecting after the type equals hidden or whatever it says, then you can't override the type either, and it's like you're stuffed. And I ran into this problem over and over and over, and eventually I was like, hey Gareth, could you take a look at this, because he's really good with XSS stuff, and he just fuzzed it to bits and found an exploit for it. And like, that's a really valuable piece of research, and you're not going to get a presentation out of that, right? But a lot of people will find it via Google and still build on it, and so on.
Well, okay, we talked about this before, but what contrarian view you can share with us in AppSec?
Probably my favorite contrarian view that I can actually give a strong argument for is that the HTTP only flag for cookies is a complete joke. It's a distraction. There's loads of scanners out there that will be like, you don't have this flag, your security is terrible. I think I've seen well-known bloggers saying this company doesn't have the HTTP only flag on their cookie, their security is a joke. And if you actually look at what difference this cookie makes when you're an attacker and you're trying to write an exploit, it doesn't make any difference. It doesn't even slow you down in like 99% of cases. There's like one tiny niche where it's useful.
Meaning the cookie is supposed to prevent JavaScript from touching the cookie, right?
Yeah, it's trying to mitigate XSS. But the thing is that if someone's writing an actual XSS exploit, they're going to use the XSS for some kind of CSRF or to proxy through the browser and so on. And neither of those techniques rely on accessing the cookie, so it's basically a waste of time.
Okay, so it's a waste of time just because that's not how it's being exploited.
It's because it doesn't put a barrier in front of the best exploitation path. So it's like you're trying to stop people from doing an exploitation that they wouldn't want to do anyway.
Other flags like secure or same site, those do provide.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. They're totally worthwhile. Same site, when same site lands by default, which is fairly soon, I think that's going to be chaos. Loads of attacks are going to stop working or get way more fiddly.
Cool. Okay. On another topic, how would you suggest a pen tester transition into research?
So the key thing with pen testers is, on the one hand, they don't potentially have a huge amount of time to just wildly dive into research topics because they're on client engagements and they just get snippets of time here and there, but they're continuously exposed to potentially interesting things. And then now and again, you'll land on an overscoped engagement and you will have too much time. And I think the key thing is just to really pay attention when that happens and just be like, well, sure, I've got 3 hours and I've done my methodology. So now I'm just going to try crazy things and I'm just going to follow up on any hunches that I've had, anything like that. I think taking those opportunities to just really dive into things is extremely important. For example, a while ago, I just overheard someone saying something about some other pen tester that used to work at the company that I used to work for, exploiting a website using Perl template toolkit. And I Googled for it at the time because I thought that sounds really interesting, and I didn't find anything. And then several years later, I was testing something. I had loads of spare time, and they let users write templates in the FreeMarker template engine. And I just thought back and I thought, I wonder what happens if I spend the next 16 hours trying to hack this one input that takes templates. And in the end, I got remote code execution with that. And that led to a whole Black Hat presentation on server-side template injection. And I found that issue when I was a pen tester, just using the spare hours that I had here and there.
Cool. Is that technique relevant for other templating engines as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, off the back of doing that on FreeMarker, once I actually got proper research time, I was like, well, since this worked with FreeMarker, who's to say that this wouldn't work on other languages? And I looked at a whole bunch of languages. I got remote code execution on most of them.
Cool. Okay, on yet another topic, if someone's completely new to AppSec, what resources would you suggest they look into to come up to speed quickly?
It kind of depends what skill level they're starting from. But I wrote a post a couple of years ago that I update regularly called "So You Want to Be a Web Security Researcher." And in that, I kind of chart the course from someone who doesn't know anything about hacking all the way to being someone that routinely finds novel exploits and novel types of exploit for a living.
So they can become you.
Yeah, hopefully better. Hopefully they don't waste so much time on things that don't work, and they don't get stuck in this one niche of hacking caches and reverse proxies over and over.
All right, and then there's also the Web Security Academy. That's on,
yes, yeah. So I spend a fair chunk of my own time designing hacking challenges and learning documentation and such like, to help people learn about web security topics. At the moment, it's fairly like intermediate level, but there's some proper challenges in there too. Yeah, like you can practice server-side template injection on there. You can practice the Webcash entanglement research that I was just talking about on that site on real systems.
Cool. What security researchers do you like to follow?
Orange Sai is amazing. I always love seeing what crazy stuff he comes up with. I love how he just gets pre-auth remote code execution on everything. That's always fun. Security MB does some really good stuff too on the more client side as well. And the thing that I really like is that you see loads of researchers that I'd never heard of previously will just do one-off awesome piece of research. And so you can't predict it. And it might not even, they might not live on Twitter like I do. So they might not have that many followers, and it might go under the radar. So I'm always on the lookout for things coming from other sources. Like maybe it doesn't go on Twitter. Maybe they post it on like Hacker News or Reddit or something instead. It's worth trying to get that input from as many different sources as possible.
Do you dedicate like X amount of time every day just looking for new ideas, or once you have an idea, you just solely focus on researching that idea?
It's a bit of a mix. So I've got a list of potential research ideas, and it's got like 300 items on it. But I'm always keeping one eye open, because sometimes I'll see something that feeds into one of those or gets the extra entry on that list to make it 301 and so on.
And just out of curiosity, you said like part of the goal of your position is to present a Black Hat. Do you like take let's say the call for papers date and then work back by, let's say, 90 days, 180 days, and say, okay, by this date I have to decide on a topic and then go forward from that? How do you do that?
Basically, as soon as I've presented at Black Hat USA, like I have like 1 week off, and then I'm doing my research for the next year pretty much. And because you never know, like some ideas will look really promising for like 2 months and then go down in flames and turn out to be rubbish. So I just start straight away and just keep hitting through topics. If I don't have something that looks seriously promising by January, then that's when I start to panic, because the CFP is in April normally, and it takes a lot of time to get everything ready and prove that stuff works.
Cool. I can imagine what that panic feels like. All right. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast. If somebody wants to find you online, where's the best place to follow your research? I'm on Twitter. My handle is albinowax, or just go to the Portswigger website and there's a research section over there that we just do that, so it's nice and shiny. Okay, cool. And then I saw on your Skeleton Scribe website that you also have a list of all previous features that you put out.
Yeah, absolutely. And no one reads the old stuff. So you can just go there, read the old stuff, and then just hack modern stuff with it because no one else is doing that. Totally worth a shot.
Awesome. Great. All right. Thanks for coming on the show. This has been very informative. That's it for today. If you have any comments or questions, you can contact me at Jamus, Jamusc on Twitter, or podcast@breachsense.io. And if you got value from this episode, then please share it with a friend. See y'all next week.